Okay, so it's been a while since I did the shiur on assorted halachos that I got asked, but we're going to Bez Hashem start up again. I'm not going to be able to do this live in person. I'm sort of recording it, in my home. But if there are any questions, you could always send them to, I think the link, I'll send it out to the main chat, but it's hashivenu.org/ask. So it's hashevaynu.org/ask. So I wrote down some of the shilas that I got over the last few days. We'll run through them. First shilah. The case was that there was an older woman I mentioned this on Friday night, I think 2 weeks ago. There was an older woman who's home for Shabbos, and there's no one with her to really help her prepare food. And one of the main things that for her to eat is cholent, because it's very soft. So she wanted to have cholent Friday night. Now, ideally, as we'll see in a moment, when you serve cholent, we don't serve it, even if it's fully cooked, we don't serve it while it's on the fire. We take it off the fire. And then when you take it off the fire, there are rules of what you have to do in order to put it back. You have to hold on to it the whole time. The fire has to be covered. There are tenoi chazara. There are stipulations that are necessary in order to fulfill the stipulations of the laws of chazara to allow you to put it back. This older woman could not lift it up on her own, and therefore the only real solution she would have is to have to to have to ladle it out while it's still on the fire. So I told her it's okay. And let me explain a little bit of the background. Now, if the food is not fully cooked, then stirring it or ladling it speeds up the cooking process. That's for sure forbidden. There's no question. Whether it's on the fire or off the fire, you cannot stir or ladle food if it's not fully cooked. But let's assume the food is fully cooked. Now, once the food is fully cooked, l'cha'ora, you should be able to ladle, you should be able to stir, whether it's on the fire or off the fire. Once it's cooked, it's cooked. However, there's an opinion of the kolboi. The sheet of the kolboi is that even if the food is fully cooked, it is aser d'oraisa to stir it while it's still on the fire. Meaning, if it's on the fire, to stir it is aser d'oraisa. That's the sheet of the kolboi. It's a little bit challenging to understand the shita of the kolboi. The Sharatzian has a hard time, Mishabura has a hard time understanding that shita. Once it's fully cooked, you're allowed to reheat it, so why can't you stir it? It must be that stirring accomplishes it, mixes the flavors in a way that even reheating doesn't. Whatever the questions are, and Ramesh Feinstein has a truth about it, but whatever the cheshbainis are, the kolboi says it's a problem. And it's brought down by the Magen Avraham and the Mishabura on the end of Shin Yud Ches. And therefore we are machmer like the kolboi. We do not stir food when it's fully cooked, even if it's fully cooked while it's still on the fire. In addition, the poskim say, the same way it's aser d'oraisa to stir food while it's fully cooked, while it's still on the fire, you should also not ladle food out while it's still on the fire, even though ladling is not stirring, but it's close enough that there's a concern that if you ladle, you might come to stir. So technically, the Mishabura paskins, you should not ladle food out while it's still on the fire. And that is obviously the standard psak. However, the Chazon Ish writes that in case of duress, in case of necessity, you could be lenient, not to stir the food, but to ladle the food. So you don't stir, just literally put the ladle in, take the food out. The Chazon Ish explains that the real problem, first of all, the kolboi is hard to understand to challah. Once it's fully cooked, it should be mutter. But even if you want to be machmer like the kolboi, it's enough to be machmer when you actually stir the food, which is more of an act of cooking, as opposed to ladling, which he feels is permitted, especially in case of duress. What's an example of a case of duress? So Shimon Eider in his Sefer brings down a couple examples. First of all, if our case, he doesn't say this, but our case would be that perfect example. If a person is a chayla, an older person, and they can't lift the food out, then you definitely could rely on the Chazon Ish that ladling is permitted. Not stirring, but ladling is permitted. Additionally, an example would be that when you take the food off the fire, let's say the cholent pot, in order to put it back, you have to have a blech. You have to cover the flame or cover the insert. And it's a whole sugya, it's not for now. Let's say I have nothing to cover it. There's no silver foil, I have nothing. So if I take it off the fire, I will not be able to put it back on. So in that situation, you could rely, says the Chazon Ish, you could rely that ladling it out is permissible. So therefore, it would be permitted to ladle it out in case of duress while it's still on the fire, as long as it's fully cooked, as opposed to stirring it. Svardim have different halachos, not for now. Okay, question number 2. A person went to the mikvah to bring Keilim to the mikvah, and then afterwards they noticed that there were stickers that they had left on the food, on the pot. Does that mean that they have to re-toivel it with a bracha, without a bracha? So the halach is like this: there's a mitzvah d'oraisa to toivel metal Keilim. There's a mitzvah d'rabbanan to toivel glass Keilim. By the way, we make a bracha. You make a bracha on d'rabbanans as well. By the way, in addition to glass and Pyrex and Duralax, Roiv Shitas hold that glazed china also requires Tevilas Keilim, because the outside is a glaze of glass. So you have to toivel it. Now the question is, you toiveled and you found a sticker. So what's the halacha with the sticker? So the halacha is like this: Min HaTorah, on a biblical level, it is a problem if the sticker covers the majority of the vessel and you don't want the sticker to be there. Meaning, according to a biblical level, midaraisa, it's a chatzitza if it covers roiv and your makbid. Meaning, it has to cover the majority of the vessel, and I don't want it to be there. If only one of those things exists, meaning I don't want it to be there, but it only covers a minority of the vessel, or it covers the majority and I don't mind, it is min haTorah accessible, permissible. However, Chazal said as long as you have one of them, it's an issue. So therefore, according to Chazal, let's talk practical. If you do not want that item to be there, but it does not cover rove, it's a problem. Stickers do not generally cover the majority of the vessel. You're talking about a small sticker. However, people don't want stickers on their kelim. You don't want the price tag. You don't generally want the sticker on your kli. And as long as the average person does not want the sticker on the kli, it is a chatzitza. Therefore, if you toivel it and you realize there's a sticker there, and the average person does not want the sticker on the kli, that is a chatzitza. Now, there are certain stickers that the average person wants, and you also want. Meaning, if everybody wants the sticker on the kli, then it's not a chatzitza. If there are certain stickers that have instructions, and everybody wants it on, or I don't know, there's some stickers where it shows that it's an antique, and having the sticker enhances the value, okay, that's a different discussion. But the average sticker, people mind. And therefore, if you toivel it, and the sticker remains, it's a chatzitza, derabanan, you're not yotza, and you have to redo it with a bracha. If, however, the person called me, and when I told them this, they said that they think the water got behind the sticker, so then I told them to, because then if the water got through behind the sticker, then it is a good tefillah. I question whether that's practically possible, and therefore I told them to do the mikvah again, but without a bracha. But if the water taka did not get through, which I think is the majority of the case, you would have to toivel it again with a bracha. Okay, that was shaila number 2. Shaila number 3. Someone asked me, I got asked this from a few people. They had heard that certain wealthy people made a mikvah in their home. And the question is there some Kabbalistic issue with having a mikvah in your home? So the answer is like this. Rav Yehuda HaChassid, one of the Rishonim, wrote a tzavah. He wrote a last will and testament. Now, in that tzavah, he has a lot of things. Some of them are more out there. Some of them are a little bit more famous, less famous. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the things in his tzavah is that a girl should not date or marry a man that has the same name as her father. And a man should not marry a girl who has the same name as his mother. That people, I think, have heard of. Not getting haircuts on Rosh Chodesh, people have heard of. Not sealing off a window in construction, people have heard of. But some of them, people have not heard of. And in general, there's a discussion amongst the poskim and the Yehuda whether the tzavah or Vida Chassid was meant for everyone. Maybe it was only meant for his family. Some of the things in the tzavah, just minig of Klal Yisrael, is not to be makbid at all. I think in the tzavah it says that you shouldn't name your child Yehuda or Shmuel. Now, people name their kids Yehuda or Shmuel all the time. Now, his name was Rav Yehuda ben Shmuel, so it would make sense that he was telling his family, do not name after me. So it's a big shaila in general. But we do try to adhere to the tzavah when we can, especially for some things that are pretty scary. So in the tzavah, in Ois Yud Ches, he says as follows: Lo yasa adam merchatz b'toch beiso. A person should not make a bathhouse in his house, a merchatz, like a schwitz, in his house. V'im yasa, and if a person does, habayis yicharev, the house will be destroyed. Elim kin osa lirchotz bo rabim, unless it's meant for public, unless it's a public bathhouse, but a private bathhouse should not be made in your house. Now, a couple things. Okay, we'll get to in a second what about showers, but so the question really is a mikvah the same? If a mikvah is the same, then you should not build a mikvah in your home unless the mikvah is open for everyone. Ramosha Feinstein, in Igros Moshe Yodea Chelik Beis, Siman Tzadi Zayin, was asked the shaila about having a mikvah in your home. Listen, if you make a mikvah in your home, but it's open to the public, and open to the community, or at least open to a decent amount of community members, then it's for sure fine. The question is, if you're making a private mikveh in your home, is it a problem with tzavas or viduchas? So Moshe Feinstein writes as follows: Vadei pasha dubar. It's pasha to me. She'ein mikvah b'chlal lashon merchatz. When Rav Yehuda Chassid said a merchatz and a mikvah are not the same. A merchatz is a bathhouse, is a place to clean yourself, is to wash yourself. A mikvah is not. A mikvah is for tahara. V'lachein pasha shemuter. And therefore, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, it's 100% mutter to have a mikvah in your home, a private mikvah in your home. It is not. And by the way, there are big gedolim. I think they say the Divrei Chaim of Sanz had a mikvah in his home, and therefore it's not an issue. Now, Rav Moshe does say, what about having a shower in our home? Everyone has a bath or a shower in your home. What about this concern of Rav Yehuda Chassid? So he first says that perhaps it is an issue, but once everyone does it, Hashem watches over the fools. In other words, while it might have been dangerous at one point, once everybody has a shower, it's fine. But then he continues, that Ramesha points out that showers and bathhouses are not the same. Bathhouses are like steams and like schwitzes. A shower, which is just meant to clean, that is not a merchatz, and therefore it's fine. I guess if someone wanted to open up like a steam schwitz in their house for private, maybe it's good to have it for the public, maybe to open it to the public. Again, you have to know exactly what I mean public, you have to ask a shayla. Okay, question number 4. Someone sent me a picture of a sauce, a Worcestershire sauce, that has fish in it. And he wanted to put it as a marinade for his chicken and for his meat. So he wanted to know, is it an issue? So I asked the person, I said, what's the hechsher? He said, OU. So I said, does it say OU fish by the OU? Is it just OU or does it say OU fish? He said, just OU. So I told him like this. The halacha is, and I'll read it to you in a moment, the source of this issue is that the Gemara tells us you're not supposed to have fish and meat together because it can cause leprosy, it can cause a physical ailment. The Magen Avraham actually says it's a physical ailment, it's not a spiritual ailment. And therefore, mixing fish and meat together, he argues maybe nowadays shouldn't be an issue anymore. Now, he doesn't paskin that way fully. We are machmer, we do not mix fish and meat together, but it's a physical concern. So the question is like this. So I told him the OU policy is as follows. If there is so much fish in that sauce that it is not nullified within the sauce itself, meaning it's not batal b'shishim, so in the sauce itself is a tremendous amount of fish, the OU policy is that they would write OU fish. On the OU, it would say OU fish. If it does not say OU fish, that means that there is fish in the sauce, but it is nullified b'shishim. Now, so that means there's fish there. And that's why they don't write OU fish, they just list it as the ingredient. So that means there is a little bit of fish, it's less than shishim. Does that mean I'm allowed to put it on the meat? So that's a machlokes. Enough poskim say that it's mutter, that Rav Shechter felt and Rebelsky agreed, that the OU is allowed to put out sauces with an OU without mentioning fish. They mention the ingredients, and then you get to choose to be machmer or not. This is from, the OU has these articles or documents where they basically bring down the shittas of Rav Belsky and of Shechter as a background to the psak. I feel like it would be so good to publicize it. This is from a Tafshin Nun Gimel, which is 1993. Rav Shechter was asked the following shayla: Hayemuter lahanik hechsher leWorcestershire sauce sheyesh by ma'at tam dag el shubavade batal b'shishim. Can you give a hechsher of the OU to a sauce that has a little bit of fish in it, a little anchovies, but it's batal b'shishim within the tube of the sauce? Knowing full well that people use this sauce as a steak sauce. So Das HaMagen Avram, so Shechter writes as follows. The Magen Avram writes in Kufayin Gimel Sifkat and Aleph, Lefakvik v'loimer, Du'ulei bezman hazeh yishlem ditchtanu atviyim, ve'in leser basar shnis basha b'dagim, sh'rif izmaninu oim she'im bezeh shum sakana. First of all, Rav Shechter quotes the Magen Avram that says that nowadays it could be the entire issue of fish and meat no longer applies because it's a medicinal issue and our medicine proves that this is no longer a concern. Okay, now we don't follow that legamri, but that's Aleph. Number 2, Ayin Darkei Tshuva, Shegedolei Achroinim Tzirfu es Dvarav. The Darkei Tshuva writes that many poskim don't paskin outright like the Magen Avram to allow fish and meat together, but they definitely take it as taken into account when they're discussing the shayla. They definitely it's called a sniff lahakal. It's into consideration. Okay, now the Pischei Tshuva in Kuf Tezayin and the Darkei Tshuva in Kuf Tezayin Sifkat and Chav Aleph, they bring down Shenechluku apoiskim leinin hach sakana The basar v'dag is bashul b'yachad. Yesh lochash afilu k'she'ein hadag noisin tam b'habasar ba'ofen shekvar nisbatel b'shishim. In other words, let's say fish and meat get mixed together, but it's batel b'shishim. There's so little fish that it's nullified b'shishim. Is it a problem? There were some poskim that say, yes, it's a problem. You say, why? Once it's batel b'shishim, I thought it's nothing in halacha. Well, they argue that because you're dealing with like poison, like a medicinal poison, no one would drop a poison in soup and say, oh, don't worry, it's batel b'shishim, because we had this in Daf Yomi recently. It's called chamira sakanta me'isura, that we're more strict with medicinal problems than even halacha. However, other poskim say no. If fish is batel b'shishim, it's fine. So first of all, over here, even if you were to mix it together, according to many opinions, because the fish is nullified in the sauce, it's fine to put it on the meat. You'll say, okay, but maybe that's only a discussion once it's already done. Meaning, once I put the fish and meat together accidentally, and it's batel b'shishim, then it's fine. But am I allowed to actively put fish on the meat knowing it's already batel? In this case, the fish is already batel in the sauce. Am I allowed to put it on the meat? Then Rav Shechter says, V'dasa issa v'heter, Rabbeinu Yonah in issa v'heter writes, Rova poskim l'hakol b'zeh. Many poskim say not only is it okay if the fish and meat get mixed together, you're even allowed to put the fish and on the meat, knowing full well because it's already batel. And therefore, says Rav Shechter, Al Kain, therefore his conclusion is, you can definitely give a hechsher of the OU to such a sauce, because the amount of fish in the sauce is already nullified. And therefore, if you put it on, it'll be mutter. And according to some poskim, you could even do it l'chachila. Steak sauce. Even though it says on the sauce that it's a steak sauce, it's fine, because Rav Shita say it's allowed. He says, even though knowing full well, most people, because you have the Magen Avram that it may no longer apply, and even if they put it on, it's mutter. And according to other poskim, you could put it on l'chachila. And he says, you don't have to put the OU fish symbol. You only put the fish symbol if this fish is not nullified within the sauce. There's so much anchovies that it's not nullified within the sauce. He says, you don't have to put the OU fish symbol, you just have to write it on the ingredients. And those that want to be machmer, not to use it on steak sauce, okay, then that's their option, their choice to do so. Might be commendable to do so, but it is not necessarily required. Okay. On to question number 5. So this is something that I get asked a lot about, and that is, you have a person who has challah that's left over from the Shabbos meal, and on Shabbos, obviously from a fleishik meal, and he wants to use it Sunday morning for grilled cheese. Is it a problem? So the background of the shaila is connected to a Shulchan Aruch in Siman Peites of Yeridea, Sif Dalet. The Mechaber writes, Misha achal gvina. If a person ate dairy, a dairy meal, v'roitz lechel basar, and he wants to eat a fleishik meal, tzarech leva'er mi'ala shulchan shiurei pashach ma'gvina. You have to get rid of all the slices of bread that you ate with the cheese. In other words, you're not allowed to use the same bread for the cheese meal as you do the meat meal. Now, it would seem like that's the Mechaber. So it seems pretty clear that if you have bread, if you have challah that you use at the fleishik meal, you're not allowed to use the same challah for a dairy meal. However, it's not so simple. There is a little bit of a caveat. Ramosha Feinstein in a tshuva, in Nigris Moshe Yeridea Siman Lamed Ches, I'll read you the tshuva. Ramosha says, I'll say the concept outside. Ramosha basically explains that when the Mechaber said it's an issue, that it's osir to use the same bread for milk and meat, for dairy meals and meat meals, he explains that let's talk about a fleishik meal. I have bread for a fleishik meal. According to the Mechaber, I'm not allowed to have bread for a dairy meal. Ramosha explains that the Isser is referring to the following situation. It's referring to a situation where I have bread, two extremes. I either put deli on the slice and then I took the deli off. That bread that has deli residue you're not allowed to use for dairy, which I think all of us would be like, yeah, it's never pasha. Or even if you didn't put the deli on the bread, but the bread was sliced for the intention of deli, and it was on the table with the deli, and there's a concern that your hands that were full of deli schmutz touch the slices. However, says Ramosha, if you have a large chunk of challah that while it was at the table for the fleishik meal, you were careful that it didn't touch meat, Ramosha says that that's not technically usher from the Shulchan Aruch. He does end off that it's a good thing to be machmer, but it's not technically usher. So according to Ramosha, sliced challah that you sliced in order to have with meat, you can. That's usher to eat with dairy, but a large hunk of challah that you were particular not to eat with dairy, not to eat with meat, is technically allowed to be used for dairy, but it's good to be machmer. And therefore, if you want to avoid all shilas, you should take the challah off the table before the beginning of the fleishik course. Ramosha says, "Ubedavar mishalchu gvina v'rotz le'echol basar she'isa b'yoredeya simin pei tes shetzarich levar shiurei pashachim agvina." This halacha that you're not allowed to have the same bread for meat and milk. Shehikshi yedidi. That Ramosha says, you asked me, shemasha shetzarich liyachid pas lemachali basar levad machali chalav avad. That from the Mechaber's basic reading, it sounds like you have to have bread for meat that is separate for bread for dairy. But how come that people are not makbid if it's usher, if it's an isser in Shulchan Aruch? Why are people not vigilant? So it explains Ramosha what I said before. Hineh isser the actual isser of the Mechaber is rak al shiure chatichas apasha achlu ba hagvina. It's where you have a slice of cheese that you put on a piece of bread, and then you take the cheese off at the end of the meal. That bread you cannot have with meat. And even if you didn't actually put the cheese on it, but it was sliced for the intention of cheese, that bread cannot be used for meat. And by the way, don't say, well, I was careful. Sliced bread with the intention of being used for dairy or for meat, the average person is not particular about because it was sliced for that purpose, and therefore we don't trust you to say you were vigilant because it's not something the average person is cognizant of. Aval pas hagadola, but a large slice of bread, she omedes bein lemachali chalav bein lemachali basar, but not a large slice, but a hunk of challah that happens to be on the table for a fleishik part of the meal, and says Ramosha nizharim bezeh, that people are particular about, ein locha shemenaga v'hagvina basar, that you don't have to be concerned. It's technically mutter to have that hunk of challah and use it on Shabbos, on Sunday, for grilled cheese. But if a person wants to be particular, even with the large hunk of bread, that because it was at a table of a fleishik meal, you don't eat it with dairy, even though this is not necessarily required to be strict, there is a maila and a harchaka. It is a good thing to be machmer if possible. And he explains very beautifully. The Hagoyis Ashri, which is a commentary on the side of the Rosh in the back of Chulin, writes as follows regarding bread with milk and meat. He says, mitzvah min hamuvchar, to not eat the same bread for dairy and meat. And Ramosha says, what do you mean mitzvah min hamuvchar? I thought it's usher to do this. What do you mean mitzvah min hamuvchar? Mitzvah min hamuvchar sounds like it's above and beyond the letter of the law. What do you mean above and beyond the letter of the law? I thought it's mamish, like essential. So explains Ramosha at this point. When it's sliced bread that is meant to be made into a sandwich, that's usher. A large hunk of challah, that the Hagoyis Ashri says it's a mitzvah min hamuvchar. So it's good to be machmer, but it is not as essential. I'll mention two shaylas that people sent in. One is just a super quick one. Can a couple get a couples massage? Does it matter that both massage therapists are female or male? Let's say it's one male and one female massage therapist. Can a guy get a massage, not a couples massage, from a woman? No. The short answer, no. A man cannot get a massage from a woman. It's a davar pashut. I don't care if someone tells me that they're working and when they're oisik in avoida, there's no machshavas. No, it's not appropriate. It's probably asur deraisa. Definitely asur. A woman should not get a massage from a man. These things are not allowed. And for a couples to get massages where a man and a woman come in and the man massages the man and the woman massages the woman, is it technically mutter? Yes. Is that I think it's just not appropriate for yin to do this. I don't think it's appropriate, but asur is the opposite sex for sure. One last one that we'll mention. I heard, this is the words of the question, I heard something about up to 40 days after conception one can daven for the gender of their child. Is that true? So, yes. It's based on a Gemara in Brachis. It's actually brought down in the Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Reish Lamed, Sif Aleph. The Shulchan Aruch is describing what not to daven. And the Shulchan Aruch says that you should not daven for things that are in the past, things that have already happened. Like, you give an example, you go into a city and you hear Hatzalah, and you're like, daven, they shouldn't be going to my house. That's a wasted tefillah, because they already know where they're going. Or, says the Mechaber, it's after 40 days and you daven that the baby should be a male. He says it's a waste. Now, they used to daven for males over females. That's not for now, but I'm not going to that. But after 40 days to daven for the sex of the baby, the Mechaber says is a waste. Why? Because it's already dictated after 40 days. It is what it is. It's either a girl or a boy. And the Magen Avram says over there, Toich mem yoim mayil tefillah. The Magen Avram clarifies, during the 40 days you could daven for the sex of the baby. But after 40 days, it's already decided. The truth is, it's a Gemara in Brachas. I'll just read you the Braisa. The Gemara says in Daf Samach Amid Aleph in Brachas, Shloish Yom Rishon, the first 3 days after relations, Yivakish Adam Racham Shlei Esriach. You should daven that the sperm and the egg take hold, that it should begin to develop into an embryo. Mishloish Varaboim, from 3 days until 40 days, Yivakish Racham Shlei Zocher. You could daven that it should be a boy or a girl. You could daven for the sex of the baby, because during the first 40 days, it's still up in the air. From 40 days until 3 months, you should daven that the wife should not conceive another embryo that would distort the features of the first one. And then from Shalish Chadashim at Shisha, from 3 to 6 months, you should daven that the baby doesn't miscarry. And Mishisha of Ad Tisha, and from 6 until 9, you should daven that it should be a easy and happy and healthy birth. Okay, those are the shilas. We'll stop now. Like I said, anyone can send me questions at hashivinu.org/ask or avizakatinsky@gmail.com. That's AVIZAKUTINSKY@gmail.com.